Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. What can Florida tell us about the U.S. presidential elections next year? Let's get to the bottom line. It's officially America's fastest growing state, and it's bleeding Democrats right and left. Florida might be home to not one, but two Republican presidential candidates, Donald Trump and just maybe Governor Ron DeSantis. What used to be a swing state is now deeply conservative, and the state legislature there has a supermajority of Republicans. So they literally don't need any Democratic votes to pass whatever laws they want. And they've been using that power to troll the Democrats, with one bill calling for the outright banning of the Democratic Party because it supported slavery 200 years ago. It's a jab against what they call liberal wokeism, more than a serious plan. So what's going on with the Democratic Party in Florida, and what can that tell us about the party's chances nationwide in 2024? Today, we're talking with one of Florida's top Democrats, former Congresswoman Val Demings, who served as Orlando's police chief for years. She was on the short list for consideration as President Biden's running mate in 2020 and ran for U.S. Senator last November, losing to Republican Senator Marco Rubio. Representative Demings, thank you so much for joining us today. Let me just start out. I know it's a mistake to look at one state in the United States out of 50 and then kind of generalize from that to the rest of the country. But Florida is a big deal, fastest growing state, but has been losing Democrats, has been gaining Republicans. I, as I told you, have been very aligned with many of your perspectives on things. So before we go national, tell us what you see happening in Florida and why it's so important for the country to watch this.
Well, Steve, it's good to be with you. And look, Florida is my home. It is the place where I was born and raised, the place where I grew up. My parents were born and raised in Florida, and it's a place that I love. But yes, we do have some work politically to do. I just think that my party kind of took some things for granted. As you well know, just a couple of years ago, we had a 500-person voter registration advantage, which was completely wiped out, and now the GOP is up by, I believe it's 300,000. And so I just think, the state that elected the first black president, or helped to elect the first black president twice in 2008 and 2012, now we find ourselves behind the eight ball. I think we took our eyes off the ball. We need leadership that wants to stay around for a while. I'm so excited about the election of Nikki Fried. I think she's going to make a great party chair and give it the time and attention and courage, making courageous decisions that she needs to do. But look, I'm not giving up on Florida. And for someone who just recently ran and lost a race in Florida, I was very pleased to hear from people throughout the state and around the nation who said, look, they're not ready to give up on Florida either. So we need to develop that long-term plan. We have some work to do, but I'm really excited about the work ahead.
I mean, just to show our voters what an uphill climb you had, the Republican Party in Florida gained 108,000 votes. We've got a chart here we'll put up for folks. And then the Democratic Party in Florida lost 330,000 votes. And even if you had the right message and everything, and I just sort of been asking, when you kind of look at, as you polled Republicans and Democrats, what they cared most about, one of the interesting things is that crime was very, very high on the Republican voter roster. And I couldn't think of anyone better than you to address that, because you were police chief of Orlando, one of Florida's major cities. And you and I have talked about police reform and all this. Has seemed to be very much. What is the Democratic Party not getting in terms of selling, on crime, on police reform, that I think you were communicating?
Well, Steve, certainly I have said for a lot of years now, certainly long before I became a politician, that the safety and security of our communities, our nation, the world, especially centered around our allies around the world, has to be our number one priority. I didn't try to go around scaring the hell out of people. We work every day to make sure that people live in the safest and securest communities. And so that was always a message of mine. I think it's always been a message of our party. But the bottom line is, what I've noticed since I've been a politician is Democrats, we just kind of bury our heads and do the work. We don't go around, like I said, trying to scare the hell out of people or really talking a lot about the accomplishments that we have. We just do the work. On the contrary, the other side talks all the time about the work that they've done or the work that they have not do, but they do a pretty good job, I think, making people believe that they've done more than they have done. If you look at the House of Representatives over the last couple of years, especially the last session, it was the Democratic Party that actually provided funding that would get into the hands of local police departments. And so we're going to keep doing the work, Steve. We're not going to play these political games that we've seen. We got to do a better job, though, of getting our message out there. As you well know, during the political season as well, this last cycle, Florida was dealing with a lot. We had a hurricane that actually affected all 67 counties. People were certainly concerned about that. Property insurance, as I'm sure you know, is through the roof in Florida. It's doubled and tripled over the last couple of years. So there are a lot of things that people are concerned about, still trying to combat the pandemic. Our schools, make sure that we keep our schools open and our schools conducive to learning, to prepare our children for the future. And so, look, the bottom line is the GOP did a better job of getting out their voters than the Democratic side did. But like I said, I'm excited about the leadership and I'm excited about the road ahead.
Let me ask you a question that if you were still in the House of Representatives and you had watched the 15 ballots for Kevin McCarthy, if you had watched the new members, whether they were Republican or Democrat, on the Rules Committee, if you saw some of the deals were going on, how do you feel that is going to, work out in the next Congress, given what you've seen with the deals Kevin McCarthy did?
Look, we're elected to go to Congress, elected in elected positions to serve the people, to promote our values, our ideas, put laws in place that protect the next generation and future generations. Any deal that is made that is not about working on behalf of the people, any deal that is made that does not move forward an agenda for the people or protect future generations is a bad deal. And so, a lot of the things that I heard were not deals that really push an agenda that works for the American people forward. So I know that Speaker McCarthy, look, he's new in the position. I just hope that he remembers why he is there and why the leadership position that he's in is so critical and important. The only thing that matters are helping to improve the quality of life for the people that they serve.
When it comes to issues like, sensible gun violence, of looking at many of the identity issues out there, mental health issues, where people are in society and trying to figure a lot of these issues. It brought out a lot of everything, which much of it has become, I think, inappropriately labeled as, oh, that's part of a woke agenda. And whether you say it one way or not, Governor Ron DeSantis says Florida is a place, where woke goes to die. And my question to you is, how do we deal with substantial social identity, gun issues in a progressive way, or I should say in a constructive way, without getting lost in this kind of politics of doing nothing?
Well, I wish a really savvy reporter would ask Governor DeSantis to define what he means by a woke agenda. I just love to hear some, for examples, on that list, because, as I said earlier, Steve, our primary responsibility is the safety and security of the American people, and secondly, of our allies around the world. I spent 27 years, as you well know, as a law enforcement officer, served as the chief of police. I watched too many families destroyed as a result of gun violence, not guns in the right hands, like some people who are just using this as a political issue would try to make you believe. Look, my father was a hunter. I grew up around a lot of guns. I carried one for 27 years. This is not about, I say it again, I hope people are listening. about taking guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. This is about keeping guns out of the hands of people who should never have them in the first place, the mentally ill, terrorists, and habitual felonious criminals. We know also that regardless of politicians that try to make this a political issue, we know that the majority of the American people agree that we should have sensitive gun laws. We should have universal background checks, red flag laws. They're being used right here in Florida. As you know, after the Parkland shooting, red flag laws were implemented here. There are well over about 7,000 cases where that law has been applied, and we believe resulted in protecting life. And so, Steve, we can do this if leaders would get their heads, let me say this the right way, out of their next political venture and really focus on keeping people safe. In Orange County, Florida, which is Orange County, where I live, which is in Florida, we say that the Orange County Jail is the biggest mental health treatment facility, and that the Orange County Jail is the biggest drug treatment facility in the region. I'm sure you will see that not just across the state of Florida, but in other states as well. That is totally unacceptable. And we have to get serious about keeping guns out of the hands of the mentally ill, keeping guns out of the hands of felons, keeping guns out of the hands of terrorists. We have to get serious about this, and we can do it if we have the political will to do so.
Let me ask you another personal question. We know through a lot of other reporting that you were once on the short list to possibly run with President Biden as his vice presidential candidate on the list. If you were in that role, what big bucket issues would you like to be carrying to solving for the country, on the national level, that aren't necessarily the vanity projects that other members of the cabinet might get assigned? What do you think we need to tackle that someone like yourself thinks we just can't shirk anymore?
Well, Steve, first of all, let me say this, that as the daughter of a maid and a janitor, it was absolutely an honor to be considered to serve as vice president. When we talk about the American dream, I think that is a prime example, creating opportunities for people that exceed even their wildest dreams or imagination. I go back to the safety and security of our nation has to be our top priority. And also that we continue to be the leader of the world. We know that other countries are watching us to see what America is doing. I do believe that as of late, they probably have been scratching their heads on some issues, wondering what's going on. But our safety and security it must be our number one priority, because it is the foundation on which we build a great nation, which we build our businesses, which we raise our families, which we educate the next generation for the leadership positions of the future. Also, I know that there's always a lot of talk about the border. It falls under keeping us safe, not being used as a political agenda item like we unfortunately have seen. These are real men and women and children that we're dealing with, but making sure that we protect our border, keep our border secure, making sure that we boots on the ground, the men and women who do the job with Customs and Border Patrol, so critical. I think that that is the best line of defense, but also using technology also to our advantage. So making sure that America is safe and secure certainly would be my number one priority. And it's not an agenda item for a term or a session. It is something that we have to be ever vigilant about every day.
Val, when you're out around Florida and campaigning and talking to citizens all over the state, I'm really interested in what they felt about America's involvement in the Ukraine war, being involved internationally. Because if there's one area where I sense a shift right now, it's as inflation is rising, as people are scrambling to pay bills, they're asking, what are we doing over in Ukraine and why is it important? And if there's one area that I've criticized President Biden, I haven't heard the conversation with the country as to why being involved internationally is so important to their bottom line at home. So what were you hearing from your constituents, and do you think we need to expect more from federal officials about explaining the whys we're engaged?
Well, Steve, while inflation is still way too high, look, the daughter of a maid and a janitor, I know what it's like to struggle to pay bills. I watched my parents do it, and I've certainly had to do it myself in my early years. Inflation is coming down, and our job is to, well, the president's job and the people in the House and the Senate's job is to make sure that we continue to move inflation in the right a direction. The only people that I've actually heard question our involvement in the Ukraine war are some Republicans, and even just a handful of them. Steve, I had the wonderful opportunity to travel our state, third largest state in the union, from the Panhandle down to the Keys. I've been to Sop-Choppy, Florida. If you haven't been, you need to put it on your radar. And I've been all the way down, of course, to in the Keys and in Miami and all, but talking to people about things that matter to them. Of course, during my Senate race, people were talking about the cost of goods and services. They were talking about the cost of gas at the pumps. We've seen those things slowly but surely move in the right direction. They were talking about supply chain issues, especially those businesses, those small businesses that are really the backbone of communities in Florida, talking about the supply chain issues that they were facing. I heard school teachers talk about, can't we just get out of the political arena and get back to teaching our children, which they do it well for the most part, and get politics out of our business. See, not once did I hear a citizen throughout the state of Florida question our involvement in Ukraine. But look, we have to be, again, we have to be ever vigilant, and we have to keep our eye on the ball. Ukraine is an ally of the United States, and our national security is directly tied to what is occurring in that region. Ukraine, I remember when I was on the Intelligence Committee with the election of President Zelensky, this young, charismatic president who was going to fight corruption very hard, but also fight for a democratic form of government. Of course, we are supporting them in those efforts. But to anyone who may ask the question, our security, our national security is directly tied to Ukraine's ability to protect and defend itself. And so maybe, again, as I said earlier, maybe we need to do a better job of really talking about the why we are there, as opposed to just talking about the millions and billions of dollars that we have put. I know a year ago there were people who thought, starting with Vladimir Putin, that the war would be over in a few days. Obviously, we underestimated the resiliency, the passion, and the love of country of the Ukrainians, but we certainly overestimated the ability of the Russian army. But look, we got to keep our eye on the ball. This is a day-by-day war, and the right thing is for America to be there in full support.
Let me just ask you finally, and I really appreciate your candor on these topics. I interviewed you shortly after the George Floyd murder. We have yet another murder that happened in the killing of Tyree Nichols in Memphis. I know there's no magic bullet. I've talked to former New Jersey governor and presidential candidate Chris Christie and said there's some departments that just need to be torn down, to the bare bones and rebuilt, because you can't just tweak it on top. I guess, in honor of Tyree Nichols and what's going on, I just want to ask you, given the informed place, what needs to happen at the federal level? What needs to happen at the local level to change this equation?
Well, let me start here. As a former law enforcement officer and a police chief, I've worked with some of the bravest, most compassionate men and women the profession has to offer. And we do know that the overwhelming majority of men and women who wear the uniform are good, decent people who would risk their lives to protect strangers. But we've had some problems, certainly with George Floyd. It was senseless. It was brutal. It was murder. It should have never happened. You're right, Steve. Here we go again with Tyree Nichols. Senseless, brutal. It was murder. It should have never happened. And the persons responsible must be held accountable. But look, I did an op-ed shortly after Tyree Nichols. I did one after George Floyd too, but did another one after Tyree Nichols, basically putting the responsibility for immediate change in the hands of law enforcement executives, in the hands of police chiefs, in the hands of sheriffs. One of the things that I did right after George Floyd was I got on the phone and called some members of law enforcement executives, and talked to them about, look at your policies, and there are some things that you can change right now, some things that you can do yourselves, like really limiting no-knock warrants, really looking at chokeholds and other use of force and when it's used and how it's used. We can always look at hiring and training standards. Police executives can do those things right now. I also did a call to action, if you will, again, with police executives. You know, many times, unfortunately, there are some who believe that any criticism or any questioning of law enforcement is not supporting. Well, good cops and good police executives know that that is not true. And when you sit back and fold your arms and do absolutely nothing, and you think that's protecting your police officers, well, doggone it, how many are going to prison? So that's certainly not protecting them. So yes, police executives need to look at their own policies and make changes that they can make right now. Long term, I hope it doesn't have to be long term. There was a lot of criticism of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. There again, we need to do something, and no, it was not perfect. There were a lot of questions about qualified immunity. I had questions about qualified immunity, but we have to do something. And I believe, since police departments, they come in different sizes. They come, you know, some have their own training departments. Some do not have training departments because they can't afford them. Some are as little as 10 officers. Some are as great as we know in New York is 36,000. That there should be national standards that can help govern the way police officers are hired, police officers are trained, and in some instances, how they are disciplined. I see this as a tool that would really assist a profession that I loved and I still love, and men and women who I call friends. I see this as a way that can improve their performance and help protect them, not the opposite.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, because it's a great conversation. Former police chief, former Congresswoman, and Senate candidate Val Demings, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Steve. Take care.
So what's the bottom line? The same debates happening in Florida are happening in all 50 states. What to teach in schools, how to police the people, which books should be banned, you name it. America's taking a long look at itself in the mirror, and sometimes it likes what it sees, and sometimes it just doesn't. The nation is fractured across many lines: geographic divides, education divides, racial divides, privilege divides, and these can affect everything for the average American, even literally their health and life expectancy. More than 150 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln talked about the know-nothing crowd who appeal to the masses by saying what's ever popular, even if they know it's wrong. But that populism has moved from the political fringe to the center of power. Witness QAnon Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. My guest today is optimistic that the country can overcome its worst instincts. But I think we need more proof. And that's the bottom line.